Hi there and welcome. Steve Wills here. Thanks for joining me. This is our second video in a two-part series regarding the new version of Workflow Ascendant 8.5. It is an all-in-one design template, as you know, designed for Power Business users. Now, we looked at last week the core of the system, state, trigger, and profile documents, as well as functionality around that core. And today, we'll be looking at enhanced security as well as error handling, test environment, migration to a new version, and then taking a look at what Workflow Ascendant 8.5 is all about, bit of a summary at the end. So regarding security, as you've seen in previous videos, no doubt, Workflow Ascendant controls who can intervene in a document at a given moment in time. So here, Director Red can go in and modify his or her own documents, but not the documents assigned to someone else, as you would expect. But what if a user has Domino Designer installed on his or her PC? Can he essentially override the security system? Now, you will always need to protect your fields, data, that goes without saying. However, we essentially turn off the workflow motor if the proper sequence of events is not respected. So workflow integrity is maintained regardless. Error handling. Well, this is a fundamental aspect of any workflow paradigm. So let's go in and see an example. That was fun, so let's double the fun. So we now have two documents in the workflow, and we'll go in now as Manager Orange. We'll attempt to forward the document in the workflow. And as you can see, a control was placed. And that is where we want to place controls when a document is advancing in the workflow. However, if we're sending a document back, for example, to the author for modification, there we do not want to put in a control, as you can see here. So data controls need to be put in place based on the path. Now, just to show you, the same error mechanism is used throughout Workflow Ascendant, be it for the front-end Power Business user or in the back-end for IT professionals. There's a robust syntax checker everywhere. So as you can see here, these are interpreted at formula language statements. That would be illegal. So also the number of entries, field names, and field values need to be the same. So that's flagged as well. Also in the view, keep in mind this is what we refer to as a linked list, and all of the nodes in that link need to be connected or should be connected. Always with the red dots indicating where the error occurred. So when that path was chosen, this particular routine was executed. This is the code abstraction that was on the send button push. So let's go back into the code and see where that actually is defined. So here's the routine. Now any text put in that particular field will display an error message with that text and block execution. And any field names put there in that field will display the red dot, provided you put the red dot next to the field in question. And this simply is the copying and pasting an existing example and naming that in that using that convention. So test environment, so much of what we do in Workflow Ascendant is using code abstraction. So we would like to be able to test that independent of the workflow. Remember that the DB admin can assume any role. This is a great time saver when we're debugging, for example. So let's say we want to test this particular routine. So we'll go into the Domino Designer. We'll make a copy of document 01, that's the form for the workflow. And we want to delete the subform. This essentially deactivates the workflow motor. Then we'll go in and we'll simply indicate the name of the routine that corresponds to the code abstraction. This button is provided by default, but normally hidden. Now we will unhide it. And with that done, we'll now preview the result. And there it is. So of course, we want to avoid having to go 7 or 8 steps into a workflow to test something that we could test independent of that. Version migration, everything is a document in Workflow Ascendant. So what I'll be showing you is basically copying and pasting documents and modifying them. Very simple process. And so the 3 sets of documents that we will be looking at will be state documents, profile documents, and then the reference document. So we'll copy paste and then modify the field. You can see here we have an agent that allows you to do this quite easily. So we'll indicate the new version, v02. WA refresh selected document simply simulates modifying, saving, and closing a document. I find it's a good idea to do that when you're copying and pasting documents that we want to interpret. And so here we are in the profile documents, doing the same thing. Then we'll be in the reference. We'll do this on the front end, just as easy. So we'll copy paste and then go into the document, change the version reference. There we go. And lastly, we need to indicate to Workflow Ascendant which version to use. Oh, needless to say, we have to change the workflow. So let's say instead of routing to manager from the initial state, we'll route directly to the CEO, to his or her chagrin. Now we come in and modify the version. Here we are. We'll say version 02 is the new version to be using. So we'll create a new workflow document, send it off, and as you can see, it has gone directly onto the CEO. So new workflow documents, follow the new workflow. Well, this is the workflow document we created right at the beginning. As you can see here, going off to Director Red, it follows the old workflow as we would want. Well, we can't ignore the database administrator. He needs to have his day in the sun. So let's walk through a few scenarios where things don't go as planned and the DB admin has to intervene to essentially make it right. So let's assume that user Orange forgot to delegate his authority to another user. It's an important document, needs to happen right away. So the DB admin goes in and creates a delegation document for the user in question. Now that's only the DB admin that can do that. Normally users can only create a delegation document for themselves. So it's today's date. Now we can go in and click immediately, update now, and that delegation happens immediately instead of waiting during the night when that normally is when that occurs. So as you can see now, C1 is now has that under his authority. And so we need to remind that user that there is a document, an important document waiting his or her intervention. So this is the standard email that's sent out. So C1 comes in, modifies the document, sends it off to, in this case, the Director Ed. Director Ed urgently comes in and archives the document. Unfortunately, it was archived a bit prematurely. And so once again, rather than having to reproduce the document and go through the workflow all over again, dbadmin can come in and actually force a state change. This is the most typical case, is when a document is archived prematurely, and of course puts in a comment. Selecting the new state, and that sends it back to the manager, who is currently, as it turns out, C1 has left the company now. This hasn't been an easy document. So once again, the DB admin can come in and change the username. You select the number of documents, all the documents typically. So C1 has now been replaced by new employee C2. As you can see, C2 now is the current responsible individual for that document. And going over to the historical, we'll see that the log was not updated as we would want, because C1 was the person that intervened in the document. And we also see where there was forced routing and the admin comments were added. So Workflow Ascendant, as you've seen, we're talking about the add formula language over and over again. On the back end, we have Lotus script with that wonderful debugger. The evaluate command, of course, being applied to that add formula language. Code abstraction, going back into the Lotus script code in the back. Integrated email as well. Trigger documents, seamlessly employing that same mechanism to invoke time-related events. And of course, real-time delegation. Not sure how many systems out there have that, but this one certainly does. Document-driven workflow for a distributed document database system. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Well, that's it for this particular video and this short series on the new version of Workflow Ascendant. Please stay tuned. The developer's guide will be coming out very shortly, and we'll be making this new version available on GitLab in the next few weeks. Thanks again for joining me.